Good afternoon, everyone. And as I stated, first of all, thank you to all of you for the great stuff you're sending me about yourselves. I really am enjoying getting to learn a lot about the staff and faculty at Nova Scotia Community College Pictou. So rather than try to write something out, I said I'd try to do a fairly brief video which would answer three questions many of you seem to have regarding me. One, what I did before I came here, why I'm in Nova Scotia, and the kind of things I like to do on my spare time. So let me start with what I did before I became the principal at Nova Scotia Community College. So first of all, for your information, I grew up in Montreal, but spent my university years at Queen's University first, doing a double major there, and then went to McGill University and got my Master's of Social Work there. And from that point on, for about, I'd say 20-something plus years, I was a psychiatric social worker, usually a clinical manager or a clinical supervisor, and worked in a variety of psychiatric and mental health settings. During that time, I became well known for my ability to work with people who are actually the most stigmatized psychiatric patients, and those are people with personality disorders. I have a real interest in personality structure and personality development, including all the facets of personality like introversion, extroversion, resilience, ability to cope with crisis, etc. So from there, my first husband and I, who I met at university at Queen's, we then moved to Peterborough, Ontario. My ex-husband was an engineer, went there to work for several years for General Electric. And I was the head of a large family counseling service at that time, which again specialized in a variety of counseling forms. And then I was asked to start teaching a little bit, usually medical leave. So people at university who needed had to go for surgery, for example, and I would step in for a few weeks to cover. The funny part for me is I always swore I would never teach because I come from a family of teachers. My mother was a department head in high school. My brother has taught all over the world, and my sister, one of my sisters, has taught everywhere, including in prisons. So I was sort of like, I don't really want to teach. But I did enjoy teaching when I covered for people and kind of had to confess I did like it. I then was asked to start a consulting business because what I started to see was I was being asked more and more and more to train people in certain areas of mental health, including what would be called dealing with difficult clients. And so consulted to well over 20 agencies. And an offshoot of that was then helping agencies that had gone through transitions, and sometimes not great transitions. So things like a chief executive officer who was fired for fraud. And then I would be called in to turn around the agency. And it was during that time that I was first asked to teach. And so I taught what is called a partial load, which is a 3/4 position in teaching in Ontario at Fleming College in Peterborough for the social service worker program and the drug and alcohol counselor program. That name has been changed since then. That's how long ago that was. And so I did that for many years while I was consulting. And I then left teaching for 2 years to, I shouldn't say left it completely. I was still doing lots of training and just part-time teaching, which was only 3 hours a week at the college, to redevelop 10 outpatient programs at a large tertiary psychiatric care hospital in Ontario, which included the closing of out-of-date programs, retraining people, redeveloping buildings, all of that. It was really quite interesting. I was then asked to return to Fleming to be one of the heads of counseling. So I was the head of counseling, tutoring, special needs, which is now called disability services, and a variety of other student services. I then was asked to be the acting dean of arts and science, which I did for a year. And then during that time, I was also then asked to be the acting dean of the School of Trades and Technology. This is usually when people kind of get their eyes rolling and say a social worker whose specialty was personality disorders, now going to be the dean of Trades and Technology. And so part of that was because our trade school for many years had been off-site. Fleming College is a little bit like Nova Scotia College. It's not considered a large college in Ontario. It's The city of Peterborough is about 60,000 people, but we had campuses out in rural areas, 3 other campuses, who had principals. And as a dean, I worked very closely with those individuals. And we had finally decided to move the trade school back to the main facility. And there were lots of reasons for that. The old trade building was like awful and really needed so much upgrading, it wasn't worth it. So because I'd had experience in my previous psychiatric history, as I call it, my history in psychiatry, moving 3 other facilities, I was asked to help with that. And that was really great fun. And we did move the trade school to the main facility into a state-of-the-art modern wing of the building. And then after that year, the trades and technology faculty voted to keep me their dean, which I have always been very humbled by. And I learned a lot. And it really changed my perspective, not just on the trades, but the use of technology in our day-to-day lives, both the pros and the cons. In the midst of all that as well, someone else became the Dean of Arts and Science in the interim, and then I was asked to become the Dean of Business. And part of that was to amalgamate business and technology. As many of you know, jobs in technology often have business components, and business jobs have technology components. And so we developed 3 postgraduate certificates that would be a combination of those: wireless information networking. We also had a global business management. We also had project management for people in technology and business. And just as I was leaving, we had developed a global supply chain management postgraduate program. We also integrated entrepreneurship into the trade school. So it really was a great mix, and I had great fun doing that. The worst part was I gained 20 pounds because I was also the dean of the culinary school. And if any of you know about culinary schools, what do? You get invited to eat. So my hope moving to Nova Scotia is I will lose some of that weight. So that's what I did previously. And I have had the pleasure, honestly, of doing a lot of different things in my life. Everything from training to teaching to field placement liaison to sitting on district health councils. That's a little different in Ontario than in Nova Scotia. I've also done reports for courts, so contentious custody trials. I've been asked to be an expert witness. So I've really had, I would say, an amazing career as a social worker, and I have enjoyed every minute of it. But I also ended up really enjoying teaching, which was a bit of a surprise to me from my childhood vow that I would never, ever teach. And so I've been thrilled to have had those experiences. So that leads to question number 2, which is, why are you in Nova Scotia? So I have no Nova Scotia roots. I'm from Quebec originally. My family's from Quebec. My mother's family's been in Quebec since 1600. So we're not Easterners at all. My first husband and I moved back and forth between Quebec and Ontario for our careers. My first husband's family actually was from the West, and we went out to Alberta and met in Etobicoke many times, and Yellowknife, where my former in-laws once lived. I am very blessed to have a very close relationship still with my former brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, my niece and nephews, their partners, and until recently, with their deaths, my former in-laws, who just both passed away in the last year. So so when you divorce at an old age like me, you end up dating, and which is quite an adventure if you ever want to hear about online dating or your friends setting you up on blind dates. I have quite the stories, but I did have the pleasure 6 years ago of meeting the man to whom I am now married, Dale. And Dale grew up in Dartmouth, although he spent most of his adult life in Ontario. But in his work, Dale has traveled and worked all over. So he came back to Nova Scotia twice as an adult to work. He's worked in Australia. He's worked in Singapore. He's worked in Chicago. He's worked in Atlanta. But I think he always had a little bit of a heart to come back to Nova Scotia. So Dale has a daughter from his first marriage, and she was at St. Mary's University in Halifax. And so we would come to visit. And I would say to him, Nova Scotia is really nice, but I'm still working at Fleming College. And about 2 years ago, I actually brought my faculty to visit Nova Scotia Community College. So a group of us from the School of Trades and Technology and Business visited some of the campuses. And I said to Dale after, gosh, I kind of like the feel of that place. It reminds me of some of the best of Fleming College. And then about a year ago, we came for yet another visit, a year and a half ago. And as we left, I actually said to him, I think I could live in Nova Scotia. And so you can imagine what happened next. He was on it. And so next thing I knew, he was looking at houses. And I had said to him, well, if you're going to be semi-retired when we move here, you need a project. So if you're going to buy a house, we need an old house you can work on. And so I retired, left Fleming College, and just before I retired, I was offered a position with the Nova Scotia Health Authority in New Glasgow for their mental health and addictions programs. And that was fantastic because we had just bought a house in Westville, Ontario. Westville, Nova Scotia. So I worked for Nova Scotia Health Authority for 9 months. And then people in the community kept saying to me, you should really, try to see if you can get work at Nova Scotia Community College. And so when Dave Freckleton announced he was retiring, I put my hat into the ring, and now I have the pleasure of being the principal of Nova Scotia Community College, Pictou campus. So that's how I ended up here. But I absolutely love Nova Scotia for a variety of reasons. And I don't regret a moment of the move. I sometimes have people ask me, do you miss Ontario? I miss some of my friends, of course. I have very good friends who I worked with in the field of social work for 20 plus years, and we certainly miss each other, but many of them now we connect over technology, right? The world has changed. And my family has lived all over. So my brother has lived in the United States for over 35 years. So I'm used to a moving kind of family. So the last question I'm usually asked is, what is it you like to do with your time? So one of the reasons I love Nova Scotia is I'm a bit of a history nut. My mother loves history. And so I grew up in a family that talked a lot about history. And I find the history of Nova Scotia, including all its warts, the colonialization, African Nova Scotian history, the history of the Acadians, all absolutely fascinating. And it really is a nutshell of some of the historical patterns we need to be paying attention to. I love the water. So I paddleboard, I kayak, I've gone scuba diving, I go snorkeling, I swim, obviously. I fish a little bit, not like I did when I was younger. So I just really adore the ocean, and which leads to my third interest, which is wildlife. So I love birds. I've been so blessed on my street here. I've already seen a pine marten and a fisher, two things you would rarely ever see in Ontario. Of course, deer that are in my backyard every day, whether I like that or not. So I'm a bit of a conservationist. I really credit my first husband for that, who was really a nature lover, and actually had won some photography awards for his nature work. So really, Nova Scotia has that. I also like to read. I read a lot. I particularly love Norwegian and Swedish murder mysteries. I know that sounds dreadful, but one of the things I like is there's often snow, which when you read a lot of American ones, they're never held up in traffic because of snow. And I cook and I bake because I worked my way through school cooking. But last but certainly not least is music. So I played several instruments. I even had my own band for about 10 years. So I played guitar, I play mandolin, I play lap steel, virtually anything that isn't with a bow. So I don't know how to play violin or fiddle. I also sang, so I was lead singer in a band, and I've been in musicals. My brother runs 2 opera companies in the States, so I do like some opera. I even like rap. I know some people don't like rap. I like country. I like folk. There's good music in every genre that you can think of. So it really does influence my life. And in Nova Scotia, since I've arrived, I've been taught to hook rugs, which is a real maritime Quebec thing. And I love it. And I'm really getting excited about that. And I took a stained glass course, so I'm actually setting up my room today to start some beginner projects. You'll see in the background 2 avant-garde pieces. That's from a dear friend of mine who is from Nova Scotia originally, who studied at the Academy of Fine Arts that you have in Halifax. And you're going to see my antique, it's called Vintage, sealskin lady behind me. I really believe that having a creative life is important, and that can be everything from running. So to be athletic, I think, is a form of creativity. to singing, to woodworking, to you name it. It's very important for you to have an interest outside of work, because I actually think they interconnect. I think if you have interest outside, what you learn from those interests, that creativity bleeds into your work and to your personal life, and certainly keeps you healthier. So that kind, I have lots of interest. Learning to weld now. I mean, I could go on and on. I think the best advice I ever got was when I was a much younger woman, and I had a female mentor at university, a professor who once said, before I went to do my master's, in life, the one thing you can learn to do is to not say no very often. Take every opportunity that's given to you, volunteer, put up your hand, because you never know where that will lead you. And her words of wisdom have proven to be true for me. So I'm going to end there, because I went on a lot longer than I thought I would, but it's because I'm older too. So take care, one and all, and hopefully I get to see you in person on campus soon, and please stay safe. Bye-bye.